His entire family turned on me, mocking me right there in court. They laughed. They pointed as if I were some kind of lunatic. But they fell silent. The moment the judge opened the folder, I submitted. My name is Emily Carter. I live in Durham, North Carolina. I loved him. I trusted him. Until I discovered it was all just an act. When I spoke up, no one believed me. His family even testified against me. But I didn't back down. I spent 9 months gathering evidence, and that day, in the final hearing, I submitted a statement, one powerful enough to destroy their entire performance. His entire family turned on me, mocking me right there in court. They laughed. They pointed as if I were some kind of lunatic. But they fell silent. The moment the judge opened the folder, I submitted. My name is Emily Carter. I live in Durham, North Carolina. I loved him. I trusted him. Until I discovered it was all just an act. When I spoke up, no one believed me. His family even testified against me. But I didn't back down. I spent 9 months gathering evidence, and that day, in the final hearing, I submitted a statement, one powerful enough to destroy their entire performance. The morning after the restraining order was filed, I sat in my car outside the courthouse, hands clenched so tight around the steering wheel, my knuckles turned white. The sun was out, but everything inside me felt dark, heavy. The kind of weight you carry not just in your chest, but in your bones, in your breath. I didn't go in, I couldn't, not yet. Instead, I drove, aimlessly, past the street where we used to live, past the coffee shop where he used to meet me with that mocking smile, past the alley where I once saw him whispering to a woman whose face I'll never forget. I kept driving until I reached Falls Lake. I parked, got out, stood at the edge of the water like it owed me something. Maybe peace, maybe clarity, maybe just the chance to scream. I sat on a bench for hours, watching the water move, wondering how I got here. Not physically, but how I let myself fall into someone's trap so completely, so blindly. I thought of my mother, how she used to tell me, Emily, you always see the best in people, just don't forget to see the rest. And I had forgotten. I saw Tyler's charm, his ambition, his tenderness. I didn't see the manipulation, the narcissism, the rot. By the time I got home, it was nearly dark. A letter was taped to my door, a legal notice. Tyler was suing me for defamation, for emotional distress. And here's the kicker, he had signatures, witnesses, people I knew, his cousin, a neighbor, even someone I once called a friend. They all took his side. It felt like betrayal layered on top of betrayal. Like the world had closed in, picked a team, and left me in the dust. I couldn't even cry. I just sat on the floor of my apartment, back against the wall, staring at that paper like it might burst into flames on its own. But it didn't. It sat there, quiet, threatening, real. So I did what I always do when I'm pushed into a corner. I fought back, not loudly, not with rage, with precision. I got a notebook, labeled it the truth. Every page was a date, a detail, a name. Every interaction, every lie. Every tiny thread I could pull until the whole damn thing unraveled. I remembered a weekend trip we took to Asheville. Tyler had gotten a call from work, stepped out onto the balcony. He didn't know I could still hear him. Didn't know I took a picture of the caller ID. Months later, I traced that number to a woman named Clarice. She worked at a real estate office, not his client, not his colleague. She was someone else he'd lied to. I started reaching out to others. Quietly, an old co-worker of his, a woman who posted a cryptic comment on his Facebook. Each conversation opened a door. Behind it, more deception, more women, more stories that sounded exactly like mine. I documented everything. He once told me the smartest criminals are the ones who make their victims look crazy. And damn, he was smart, Too smart, but not smarter than me. I went back to the police, armed with more than emotion. I had timelines, records, testimonies. One detective listened, really listened, said it wasn't the first time Tyler's name came up, but no one ever had enough proof. That's when I knew what I had to do. I hired a private investigator, took half my savings, didn't tell anyone. For the next 3 months, I became obsessed with tracking every move Tyler made, who he met, where he spent, what he did. I followed the paper trail, the apps, the aliases, and every piece, every receipt, message, wire transfer, it built something, not just a case. A reckoning. The day I showed my PI's report to the lawyer I'd hired quietly, he sat back in his chair and said, "This isn't just civil. This could go federal." And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. Tyler had taken so much from me. My money, my sense of safety, my voice. But now I had power, I had proof, and I had a plan. So I waited while he strutted around town like he'd already won. Waited while his family told people I was mentally unstable. Waited while friends of mine dropped away like dead leaves in autumn. I didn't react. I didn't defend myself. I let them believe I was defeated. Because revenge, real revenge, isn't loud. It's patient. And mine was coming. The closer the court date came, the more I rehearsed everything in my head. Not just the facts, those were solid. It was the delivery. I knew that I wouldn't just be speaking to a judge. I'd be speaking to people who already had a story about me in their minds. A character, jealous ex, crazy girl, bitter failure. I had to be precise, measured, irrefutable. So I practiced in front of the mirror. I practiced alone in my kitchen. I recorded myself reading the statement I wrote again and again until the tone was right. Not too emotional, not robotic, just enough to sound like someone who'd finally found her voice. And yet, the night before the hearing, I still couldn't sleep. My mind kept playing back every moment. Tyler's smile, his hands on my shoulders when I doubted myself, his voice always smooth, always calculated. I wondered if he was rehearsing too, or if he even needed to. When you're a liar long enough, the lies become muscle memory. The morning of the hearing, I wore navy blue, strong, neutral, controlled. I walked into that courthouse with my lawyer at my side, my binder of evidence in hand, and a calm I didn't recognize in myself. It wasn't fake. It was forged. Through fire, through silence, through betrayal. Tyler was already there, smirking, wearing the same confidence he always did. His family sat behind him. A few of his friends were there too. I could feel their eyes on me, weighing me, dismissing me. Let them look. I thought, let them stare. Because when the truth hits, it won't whisper. When the judge entered, the room shifted. Everything slowed. My pulse was steady. For once. His lawyer began, predictable, painting me as unstable, emotional, manipulative, said I was obsessed, that I couldn't handle the breakup, that I created a fantasy where I was the victim. Then it was my turn. I stood, cleared my throat, opened the statement, and I read, word for word. My voice didn't shake, not once. I laid out the timeline, the lies, the accounts, the receipts. I referenced emails, attached photos. I played audio clips. I read the statements from the other women. I showed the report from the investigator. I didn't look at Tyler. I didn't look at his family. I looked at the judge, straight on, like I was speaking for the first time. And in a way, I was. When I finished, there was no sound in that room, not even breath. The judge took a long pause. Then he asked for a recess to review the materials. We waited outside. Tyler looked pale. He didn't smirk this time. His father was red in the face. His mother clutched her purse like it was the last thing anchoring her. And me, I just sat there, silent, but no longer powerless. The hallway outside the courtroom was colder than I remembered. It might have been the air conditioning, or maybe just the way adrenaline fades, leaving you hollow and tired. I sat on the wooden bench, hands folded, my lawyer pacing nearby. Tyler's family had moved down the corridor. I could still hear their whispers, but I didn't care anymore. I had done what I came to do. I had spoken, on record, with evidence, with calm, with fire hidden just beneath the surface. The recess dragged on longer than expected. I stared at the same stain on the tiled floor until my lawyer sat beside me and said quietly, "No matter what happens today, you've already done more than most would dare." I nodded, but I wasn't done yet. We were called back in. The courtroom was colder now, too. Or maybe the silence made everything feel sterile, like a place where truth had to live. Even if it came limping and bloodied, the judge took his seat. He looked at me, then at Tyler, and he began to speak. He addressed the findings, the financial inconsistencies, the repeated fraudulent activities, the statements from multiple women, the forensic traces of altered documents. And then he said a phrase I'll never forget. "There appears to be a consistent, intentional pattern of manipulation, both financial and emotional, across multiple parties." That was it. No shouting, no dramatic pointing, just calm, judicial damnation. Tyler didn't move. His lawyer tried to object, asked for more time to review the supplemental evidence. The judge denied it. The gavel hit, the session ended, and I watched a man who once told me I'd never be believed get escorted out of that room. Not in handcuffs, not yet, but the crack had formed, and cracks, given time, turn into collapses. After court, I sat in my car. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the dashboard and let my hands shake. It wasn't over. But the worst part, the doubt, the loneliness, the gaslighting, that part was finally shifting. Over the next few weeks, investigations deepened. More women came forward. Shelby, Clarice, even a woman from Chicago who hadn't seen him in 5 years but remembered his lies like they were carved into her skin. The authorities launched a deeper probe. The FBI got involved. Apparently. Tyler had crossed state lines with fake identities and wiring schemes. It had grown beyond me. Way beyond. People who once avoided me now reached out. Apologies came in hesitant texts. "I didn't know. I'm so sorry I doubted you." But the words didn't matter much anymore. I wasn't angry, just done. I focused on rebuilding. I deleted old photos, changed locks, created new accounts. I saw a therapist who helped me unravel the tangled narrative I had been living inside. I started writing again, not for court, not for proof, just for me. But just as life started to feel quiet again, the knock came. 2 federal agents. They asked me for a full sworn affidavit, said my cooperation had helped crack open a fraud network that might involve more than just Tyler. A ring. A system. I nodded, agreed. Sat through 3 hours of formal questioning. And when they left, I sat on my couch in silence for a long time. Because I realized something. It was never just about Tyler. It was about every person like him. Every polished liar who counted on the charm. Every predator in a suit. Every manipulator who laughed while their victims crumbled. And this time, we weren't crumbling. We were rising. Word spread. An article was published. Local man investigated in multi-state financial scheme. It had no photo, but people knew. My boss called me in, said, "I had no idea you were going through all that. If you ever need time, say the word." I thanked him, politely, but I didn't need time. I needed truth. That's what this had always been about. Not revenge, not really. It was about being seen, heard, believed. And now, when I walk into rooms, I do so with my head high. I don't flinch when someone says his name. I don't tremble when I see a black Mercedes. I don't wake up panicking from dreams I can't remember. Healing doesn't always come in waves. Sometimes it comes in dust, little moments, like sipping coffee and not thinking about whether it was poisoned with a lie, like smiling at your reflection because you finally see yourself, not the version he tried to rewrite. And sometimes Healing comes when you hear that the man who tried to destroy you has been indicted on federal charges. That news came 3 months later. I got the call on a Tuesday. The agent said simply, "It's moving forward. We'll keep you updated." I thanked him, hung up, and then I laughed. For real. Loud and full and almost shocked by the sound of it. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't surviving, I was winning. That night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine and watched the sunset paint the sky in burnt oranges and soft purples. It was quiet, peaceful in a way that made me realize how loud my life had been for so long. Not loud with sound, but with doubt, with fear, with the constant second-guessing that Tyler had trained me into. Now, that noise was fading, and in its place was something stronger, something I hadn't felt in years. Self-trust. I remember opening my journal and writing one sentence, "You're not broken, Emily. You were bruised by a hurricane that dressed itself in charm." The weeks that followed were slow, but solid. I rebuilt my finances, every dollar accounted for. I joined a support group for victims of financial abuse, women with stories that mirrored mine in terrifying detail. Some had lost more money. Some had lost custody of their kids. Some had lost their homes. But none of them had lost their fire. We became something like a tribe. We lifted each other up. We compared notes. Some even joined the investigation. What began as my personal war turned into a movement of sorts. And Tyler. He vanished from public life. His once vibrant social media accounts went dark. The people who once sang his praises were silent now. Not because they suddenly believed me, but because associating with him became inconvenient. Funny how truth works. It doesn't always change hearts, but it sure shifts reputations. I even began speaking at events, colleges, women's advocacy panels. I told my story not because I wanted pity, but because I wanted power redistributed. If even one woman heard my voice and thought, "Maybe I'm not crazy," then everything I endured would carry weight, purpose. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Justice wasn't a single courtroom moment. It was a lifetime of showing up, unafraid, of telling the truth, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. I had once been Emily Carter, the woman who loved too hard, who trusted too deeply, who lost almost everything. But now I was Emily Carter, the woman who fought back. The day Tyler's indictment was announced publicly, the headlines were colder than the truth deserved. Durham man indicted in multi-state fraud case. That's all it said. No mention of the lies, the heartbreak, the homes broken, the names ruined, the trust shattered like glass. But I didn't need a headline to feel the weight of justice. I felt it in the way my hands stopped shaking, in how I slept a full night without waking up, gasping for breath, in how the silence in my apartment no longer scared me. It was a strange thing, watching justice crawl toward you. It doesn't come with applause. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes slowly, quietly, like a sunrise through fog, steadily, unmistakably, beautifully real. Tyler's arraignment was scheduled for a Monday. I almost didn't go. But something in me needed to see it, not for revenge, not even for closure. I just needed to witness the machine that he once used to silence me, finally turn against him. The courtroom was different this time, larger, federal, less personal, more procedural. Tyler looked smaller now. He wore a gray suit that didn't quite fit, his hair unkempt, the smirk long gone. He didn't glance my way, not even once. His lawyer spoke for him. He pled not guilty. But everyone in that room knew the truth was a wave coming and Tyler couldn't outrun the tide. Afterward, I stepped outside into the January cold. The wind hit hard, but I welcomed it. It made me feel alive, present, solid. Reporters swarmed. I said nothing, just walked past them like they were ghosts. I wasn't their story, not anymore. I was my own. Back home, I found a letter waiting for me in the mail. No return address. I opened it with the caution of someone who had lived through too many surprises. Inside was a single line, handwritten. I believe you now. I'm sorry. No signature, no clue. But I didn't need one. I recognized the handwriting. It was Diane Tyler's mother. And for the first time in years, I cried, not from pain, but from the quiet, stinging relief that comes when the past finally whispers, I was wrong. The weeks that followed were quiet, no dramatic updates, just court scheduling, new victims testifying, prosecutors preparing. I wasn't involved in every detail anymore, but I was always informed. I remained a witness, a foundational one. My statement had been cited in over a dozen other interviews. My name had become a reference point. And that responsibility was heavy, but not unbearable. One night, I got a call from Shelby. We hadn't spoken in a while. She was in Texas now, rebuilding her life too. She told me about a podcast doing a series on financial abuse and asked if I'd be willing to speak. At first, I hesitated, putting my voice into the world again, sharing my scars, even if they'd healed. But then I remembered how many nights I had scoured the internet for stories like mine, for proof that I wasn't alone, for someone to say, this happened to me too, and I survived. So I agreed. The interview was raw, unfiltered. I didn't script anything. I just spoke. Told the story as it happened, not for drama, for truth, for power, for the girl sitting on her bedroom floor right now wondering if she's going crazy when in fact, she's just being manipulated by someone who's very good at it. The episode aired 2 weeks later. I expected hate, trolls, victim blaming. Instead, I got emails, dozens, then hundreds. Women, men, non-binary people, people from the U.S., from Canada, from Europe, stories that bled into mine, names that could have been swapped with Tyler's, wounds still fresh, some decades old, and all of them ended the same way. Thank you. I thought it was just me. One message stuck with me. A girl in Ohio, 22. She wrote, he took everything, my savings, my trust, my sense of self. But then I heard your voice, and I decided I'm not done fighting. I sat with that message for a long time, read it again and again, because maybe that was the point all along, not just to survive, but to give others a blueprint for survival. And so, I kept going, I kept speaking, I kept standing, not because I was fearless, but because I finally understood what real power looked like. It wasn't control or silence, or the ability to make someone doubt themselves. It was truth, said out loud, held without shame. And when I closed my eyes at night now, it wasn't his face I saw. It was mine. Clear, unapologetic, whole. A few days later, I got another call, this time from the district attorney. The trial date had been set. They wanted me present, not just as a witness, but as the voice that began it all. My testimony would open the prosecution's case. It wasn't just symbolic, it was strategic. My evidence had built the skeleton of this case. My voice would give it flesh. I hung up the phone and stood in my living room, still for a long moment. And then I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I was ready. The day of the trial felt like standing at the top of a cliff, toes curled over the edge. But I didn't fall. I flew. I walked into that courtroom wearing black, not for mourning, but for power. The kind of power that doesn't shout. The kind that sits still, straight, eyes forward. Tyler sat across from me, and this time, he did look at me. But it wasn't the same. There was no smirk, no smug glint. Just a flicker of fear. I took the stand, swore my truth, and I told the story again. But this time, it wasn't to be believed. I had already been believed. This time it was to convict. Every sentence felt like a blade. Every pause a silence loud enough to make jurors lean in. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I simply told them what happened. And let the evidence walk beside my words like armor. When I stepped down, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew the tide had turned. Over the next few days, other witnesses testified. Victims, experts, financial analysts. It became clear that Tyler wasn't just a bad man. He was a systematic predator. A fraud with a face so clean it fooled banks, employers, even families. And then the defense rested, weakly. The silence in the room said it all. Closing arguments came and went. The jury deliberated for 2 days. And on a Thursday afternoon, they returned with a verdict. Guilty, on all counts. When the judge read it aloud, I didn't cheer. I didn't gasp. I just closed my eyes and breathed. Not because I needed air, but because I had finally reclaimed it. The courtroom emptied slowly. Reporters rushed out first, hungry to break the story. Jurors shuffled out next, quiet and contemplative. Tyler remained seated for a long moment, head low, as though he still hadn't heard the verdict. Guilty. Every syllable of it echoing in the wood-paneled room. I didn't stay to watch him leave. There was nothing left to see. Outside, the sky was overcast. A thin drizzle hung in the air like a question that no longer mattered. I stood at the top of the courthouse steps, breathing in the damp chill. My arms wrapped around myself not for warmth, but for grounding. It was over. Not in a storybook kind of way. There were no parades, no balloons, no cathartic screams, just the quiet knowledge that I'd dragged the truth into the light, and it stayed there. I walked back to my car. Every step felt unfamiliar, like I was walking through a world that had finally realigned. The air smelled different, not cleaner, just sharper, more honest. That night, I didn't dream of Tyler. I didn't dream of courtrooms or evidence or late-night gasps in the dark. I slept, deeply, the kind of sleep you earn, the kind that only comes when your soul has stopped bracing for impact. The next morning, I opened my laptop and saw the story everywhere. Convicted conman faces federal prison. Justice for dozens as fraudster falls. And there it was my name, Emily Carter, the first domino, the girl who refused to be silent. I got messages, hundreds. Again, some from people I knew, most from strangers. But this time, the tone was different. They didn't just thank me, they believed me. Belief is a powerful thing. It's not loud or glamorous. It doesn't erase the pain, but it builds something in its place, a foundation. And on that foundation, I began to rebuild my life. I moved out of Durham, not because I was running, but because I was done living in a city that held too many shadows. I chose Asheville. Quiet, mountain air, fewer ghosts. A small apartment with big windows and a porch where I could drink coffee in peace. I found work with a nonprofit that focused on financial literacy for women. The kind of work that felt like planting seeds. Every seminar, every story, every hand raised, I felt it. Purpose. The world didn't change because Tyler went to prison, but my world did. And sometimes, that's enough. One evening, I sat on my porch watching the sun dip behind the ridgeline when my phone buzzed. It was an email. No subject line. Just one sentence. Thank you for making sure he didn't get away with it again. No name, but I knew it was one of them, one of us. I closed my eyes and let the moment wash over me. It wasn't victory. It wasn't revenge. It was peace. Months passed. I spoke at more events, wrote articles, helped launch a support network for survivors of coercive fraud. I met a woman who said, "Your voice got me through my divorce." Another told me, "I never even knew this kind of abuse had a name until you." And slowly, I became something I never imagined. A lighthouse. Not a savior, not a hero, just a fixed point of truth in a storm of manipulation. And if someone else could see that light just enough to steer themselves to shore, then I had done my part. Then, on the 1-year anniversary of the trial, I received a certified letter. From Tyler, my stomach twisted. I held the envelope like it might explode. It was brief, a single sheet. No apologies, of course not. Just a line that read, "You were smarter than I thought." And I smiled. Not because I needed his validation, but because I didn't. Because that single sentence wasn't power, it was surrender. I folded the letter, placed it in a box with the court documents, and slid it into the back of my closet. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because it no longer had power over me. The past would stay where it belonged. I sat back down on the porch. The air was cool, The cicadas hummed. And for the first time in a long time, I whispered to myself, "You did it. Not perfectly, not without scars, but wholly, bravely, honestly." And that, I realized, was the truest revenge of all. Later that week, I found myself standing in front of a crowd of students at a university lecture hall. The topic was narratives of power and survival. I wasn't the only speaker, but when it was my turn, the room fell completely silent. I told them what happened, not in legal terms, in human ones. I spoke about love, about deception, about how betrayal doesn't always come with bruises, but it cuts just as deep. I talked about how abusers don't always scream. Sometimes they whisper. Sometimes they smile while they dismantle you. And I talked about resilience, about what it means to rebuild not just your life, but your sense of reality, your sense of self. When I finished, a girl in the back raised her hand. Her voice trembled when she asked, "How did you learn to trust again?" I paused. The truth was I was still learning. Trust wasn't a switch. It was a daily decision, a risk, a hope. But I looked her in the eye and said, "I started by trusting myself again, and that was the hardest part." Afterward, she came up to me. We hugged. She whispered, "Thank you for surviving out loud." Those words stuck with me, because that's what I'd done. I didn't just survive. I let the world see the wreckage, the scars, the healing, and somehow, in that vulnerability, I found power. Real, unshakable power. A year later, I published a book, a memoir, raw and unapologetic. I didn't soften the edges. I didn't disguise the pain. I wrote it the way I lived it honestly. It hit bestseller lists within weeks. But more than sales or reviews, what mattered were the letters, the ones that arrived daily. Handwritten notes, emails, DMs from people around the world. Every story a mirror. Every voice echoing what I had once felt. I thought I was alone. I wasn't, and neither were they. That's what justice looks like sometimes, not in verdicts, but in voices. In the undeniable chorus that rises after a single person dares to speak. Now, when I look at myself in the mirror, I see more than a survivor. I see a storyteller, a truth teller, a woman who refused to disappear. I know there will be other Tylers in the world, polished, charming, dangerous. But I also know there will be other Emilys, and they won't be alone anymore.